So apparently, there's been some reactionary hullabaloo around the recent release of the game Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, though not about how awful that is as a title. No, the reactionary fans are apparently angry that the game has somehow changed by portraying their beloved main character Henry as having a romantic interest in men, and subsequently being able to romance a male character, which was something the player couldn't do in the first title. Now, I don't usually follow what chuds are mad about online, given that their reasons for being angry usually boil down to bigoted bias against any minority representation, or deviation from heteronormative or bioessentialist worldviews. So I'm not going to do what some might consider the requisite research into the opinions and arguments for why a game developer may have somehow betrayed their trust or gone woke.
You keep using the word. I don't think it means what you think it means.
I'm not going to present their opinions here, nor debunk them one by one, thus giving those opinions a platform and legitimizing them as part of the conversation. Hell, I'm not even sure what the exact context of the events in the second game are that have led to these opinions reaching me in passing, and I'm not going to look it up. And I'm not going to do all that for one simple reason. I don't have to, because Henry Kingdom Come has been gay the whole time. It's apparent in his interactions with women and sexuality in general, and ultimately, he has a boyfriend. He's gay. Henry is gay. So, if you're here because the title or thumbnail made you angry, to have an argument in the comment section, or to try and debate me in the marketplace of ideas about this fictional video game character's sexual orientation and how that somehow hurt your feelings,
Stop it. Get some help.
I'm not here to persuade you. I'm not here to change minds. I'm not here to own anybody online or even to insult you for whatever views you might have. I'm only torturing myself. I'm the one who's got to edit this. If any part of my introduction hurt you or made you angry, I'm sorry. Maybe you should watch something else, something that you'll enjoy. That won't make you angry at some stranger's video game opinion, because that's not why I'm here. No, my only purpose here is to present my interpretation of this character in this piece of art, and to lay out the frankly overwhelming evidence that led me to that interpretation, and hopefully have fun and entertain you along the way. So, if you're still watching, I assume you're cool with all of that, or at least willing to approach media interpretation with an open mind. So, let's get to the main event. Here's why Henry was always gay in Kingdom Come Deliverance.
Henry, pseudo-reliable narrator.
First, let's talk about how the game's story is relayed to the audience. At the very start of Kingdom Come Deliverance, which I'm going to shorten to KCD for all of our sakes, the opening narration describes the political situation in the realm of Bohemia immediately preceding the events of Henry's story. It's a neat little piece of monarchist and imperialist propaganda that talks about how great the last king was and how stinky and unreliable his son Wenceslas is, and why his other son, Sigismund, felt the need to overthrow him and do a war to consolidate control over the fracturing Roman Empire. If you need to take a break to masturbate because the Roman Empire was mentioned, please do so now. This history is important to the plot, but the details are completely irrelevant, especially in the context of what I want to talk about. The only thing that matters to us is the very ending of this intro, where the narrator reveals himself to be our main character, Henry.
It is here that my story begins.
This is important because it cements all of the events that follow for the entirety of the story as being told from Henry's perspective. I know, that sounds obvious. Of course it's Henry's perspective if you're playing as Henry. But it's an important thing to acknowledge because it makes the events in the game's narrative inherently biased and subjective through the lens of Henry's perspective. In a different style of storytelling with a detached third-person narrator, the story being told can be claimed to be a bit more objective, the narrator being the all-knowing writer, especially in fiction, where the writer-narrator is theoretically the final authority. When events occur on screen in KCD that Henry is not present for, we can't take these events as objectively having happened as presented, because they are being told to us by Henry. So we must assume that either Henry put them together from other people's accounts, or that he made them up based on his own assumptions. And events Henry was present for can't be taken at face value either, as memory is fallible and elastic. Events are not perfectly preserved in one's mind like a video recording. They are recreated in imagination each time they are recalled. There's a bigger point to be made here about the reliability of historical narratives as well. KCD's marketing was especially focused on its faithful recreation of Bohemia based on historical record. However, All written history was recorded by people who brought their own biases and perspectives to the records, and the people reading them centuries later bring their own interpretations to the readings of those events, meaning anything claiming to be objective history has to be evaluated on the strength of its sources' reliability and verifiability with other concurrent sources. You can make an entire, much longer video on this subject as it relates to KCD specifically, but I'm not a historian, I don't have that much time, and it's beyond the scope of this project. What I want you to take from this can be summarized thusly. KCD is Henry's account of the events therein and must be analyzed and interpreted while staying aware of that perspective.
Henry and the fairer sex.
Like any good hero's journey, Henry's story often touches on the subjects of romance and sexuality, particularly pertaining to Henry's interactions with women. If I was to engage with the arguments against an interpretation of Henry as gay, I imagine this would be a big sticking point for those arguments. Henry can have sex with several women in KCD. He starts the narrative with a girlfriend, Bianca, flirts with the miller's daughter, Teresa, and can even romance her in a series of side quests. But he doesn't sleep with or romance any men. And to the straw men I have just constructed for this introductory idea, I must say, please shut up and leave me alone.
Leave me alone!
I personally found most of the interactions Henry has with women to be incredibly awkward and not incredibly convincing as an argument for Henry's straightness. Bianca, his girlfriend, is fairly insignificant to Henry's story, mostly because she dies in the opening events of the game. Henry has a few vaguely flirtatious words with her, but there isn't much chemistry there. It feels like he's putting on the expected performance of courting her. There's even a scene where Bianca, talking to Teresa, insists that Henry needs alcohol just to be intimate with her.
A real man should be sure of himself without having to swig schnapps all the time.
You might be right. You know, he even drinks it before we...
Now, I'll recognize that this is a joke by the developers about players saving before doing dangerous in-game events, albeit a ridiculous one.
A real man doesn't save his video games. He grinds out levels so he never dies. If he does die, he just puts up with losing hours of progress and does it all again.
Maybe I'm too normie-pilled or whatever. Maybe I'm not a real gamer. But personally, I think you should value your time a little more than that, regardless of your gender. And I don't think I'm alone here. I mean, the #1 most downloaded KCD mod is Unlimited Saves. Over 1 million downloads. That's a lot of not real men who like this game enough to install mods for it to make the save system not garbage. All that aside, remember, even though this is a story being presented in-universe by Teresa to Henry, Henry, our narrator, is then relaying it to us, the audience. It's important to Henry that we know he needs his big boy juice to have sex with Bianca. The other sexual encounters portrayed in the game don't paint Henry as much of a ladies' man either, for the most part. Henry can purchase the services of sex workers at bathhouses regularly, and those scenes simply cut to black and then give you a perk called Alpha Male, which is hilarious to me.
I got to do sex on a girl. I'm such an alpha now.
It just screams overcompensating and insecure to me. Another time Henry is shown to be sexually engaging with a woman, he has this shocked, confused look on his face. I think the intention here was that Henry could be having sex for the first time in the story, so he's unsure of himself. But I don't know, this reads to me like he's not sure about doing it at all. I'd even argue he doesn't really consent to this. I know as the player you don't get the chance to. It just happens as part of a montage of a night out drinking. From Henry's perspective, he got drunk and had no real control over his actions for the rest of the night, including possibly losing his virginity against his will. There's another opportunity to court a woman later, a wife of one of the game's lords, and the whole thing is framed very strangely. She is coming in hot as soon as she meets Henry, visits him in the dead of night alone to talk.
I didn't wake you, boy, did I?
What brings you here at this hour?
I thought you could do with a little wine. Now, Henry, I know this is all very new and strange for you. I was young when I married my husband. It was my father's wish. Shortly after our marriage, before I even got a look at Talmberg, the castle was stormed and my husband was imprisoned. And after 7 years, my husband returned to me an infirm old man.
About how old her husband is and how she misses being around young people.
When I was a little girl, there were always lots of other children around, and young men and women of the court. It was so merry. I always hoped it would be like that when I was grown up too.
A bit of an error here in my script, which I somehow didn't catch until editing the video. Stephanie says this a bit later when the hookup is close at hand, not here in their first encounter. My bad. It's never directly addressed how old she is, or even how old Henry is, but the context here is that she is an older, more experienced woman for whom Henry, a younger man, does an assortment of jobs, and she repays him by taking advantage of him.
And it can all be yours if you just step on me, mommy!
Yeah. He seems so hesitant and uncertain in these scenes as a result of the power imbalance at play here, and it's kind of uncomfortable.
This shirt was my father's. He was built very much like you. Broad shoulders, strong chest. It should fit you just right.
But I can't accept this. It's too valuable.
Won't you try it on at least?
What, right now?
Why not? Don't worry, I won't look. I'll turn my back.
And what if your husband comes in?
He won't. Neither will anyone else.
Oh my gosh! What do I do?
The player does get the agency in deciding if he does it or not, which is cool, but also the main reward for the quest, a fancy shirt, is locked behind hooking up with her. This is a bit gross, but in a way, I actually consider it an elegant bit of game design. The player is intended to be empathetic with Henry's emotional state here. This woman is pressuring him to help her, at first with normal tasks, and then with sexual activity that is highly inappropriate in context. It puts Henry in a tough place. He wants to help, and maybe wants the sex too, but he knows he shouldn't. The player also wants to complete the quest, and maybe wants the sex scene, however awkward it might be, but they also want the reward. This mixing of conflicting motivations makes the decision a more interesting one than simply getting the booty at the X on the treasure map, pun intended. This is also another instance where the scene cuts to black before the actual intimacy, insinuating that while recounting the tale, Henry considers this an unimportant or embarrassing detail.
Forgive me, my lady, I shouldn't have.
I don't mind.
Mommy!
The strongest argument one might make for Henry being hetero as hell is that he can engage in a long courtship with Teresa, one that takes place over several side quests. After completing all of the dates with Teresa, she and Henry can have an arguably pretty steamy hookup in a bar near her house, the most explicit sex scene in the game. And from then on, Henry can visit her occasionally to get a temporary stat boost, and also get her to sew up his damaged clothes, because, you know, women be doing the sewing. I can see how someone might go through these quests and come away with the understanding that Teresa and Henry are in love and they will be happily ever after. But uh-oh, what's that sound? It's the deafening roar of my unstoppable cynicism coming to smash these straw men into microscopic pieces. The courtship between Henry and Teresa is one of the highlights of the game for me, genuinely, but almost entirely for the performances from these two actors, Tom McKay and Victoria Lynn Carroll. McKay delivers a strong performance for the entire title, honestly. His emotional range always comes through, even when he's being directed strangely or reading the most asinine dialogue.
Where's my fucking sword? What a lovely evening we're having. Nice and mild, eh? Seems to me it was hotter this time last year. Don't you think?
And Carroll's incredibly warm and enrapturing voice work makes the already well-written lines for Teresa shine like gold, especially in the DLC that puts her in the player character role. That shit absolutely slaps. Why do I write such long sentences? They're too long. Like, they make you choose what to say to her dying brother when he asks you about the rest of their family.
What about Pa and Steve? Where are they?
Oh, Sammy. I'm sorry. They killed them. They killed them both. I was there. And they almost killed me too.
No music, no flashy cutscene, just gut-wrenching voice performances. Unfortunately, the courtship writing itself is some of the most awkward, juvenile-feeling interactions in the whole game.
What's it like serving nobility?
It's endless luxury, money, banquets, games stuffed with other games.
A chicken stuffed with a frog?
Yeah, and that's nothing compared to a frog stuffed with a chicken.
A goat stuffed.
With a pig?
What the fuck are we doing here, guys? I think this is somewhat intentional. They're young and it's supposed to be silly and a bit embarrassing, but it's just so clumsy that it causes me actual discomfort to watch it every time. More importantly, did you notice the numbers there on the bottom of the screen? These numbers represent the skills of the parties engaged in conversation, and Henry needs higher skills than whoever he is talking with to persuade or coerce them with the appropriate stat. Teresa's skills are all pretty low, so using any of the options in any of the dialogues with her will succeed and make a good impression. In effect, this means if Henry pursues Teresa, he essentially cannot fail. Now, there could be any number of reasons for this, but I think there's two main ways we can interpret this choice, the first being the metatextual. Teresa is essentially the only romanceable NPC, and the developers wanted players who pursued the quests to be nearly guaranteed the reward at the end, the aforementioned sex scene.
Wow!
The second interpretation, and the one I favor for being much more interesting, is that these stats actually represent Teresa's state of mind much more than they do any sort of challenge for the player or Henry. Teresa already has feelings for Henry from the start and acts accordingly, being easily charmed by anything he does, with the exception of attempts at intimidation. This interpretation is supported not just by how smoothly the courting quests go, but also by the DLC starring Teresa, where the game insists on showing the two having even more goo-goo-eye moments with heavy-handed music in the background. Just in case you don't get that this is supposed to be romantic. Henry is awkward here, like he basically always is with women, but Teresa is confident and insistent and eager to make physical contact. It's hard for me to read it as anything but her being interested in him. Then there's the conclusion to the entire courtship quest, which can end one of two ways. Either Henry tells Teresa he wants to marry her, or he tells her that he's not sure he's interested in anything more with her. The former gives the good ending, where Henry gets overzealous and Teresa lets him down easy by being more reasonable, and says they can keep seeing each other without expectations.
Well, we'll be together. Like a couple. And when the time comes, you'll take me as your husband, right?
You're full of yourself, aren't you? But that's not how things are done. But seriously, Henry, what kind of husband would you make? You can't sit still in one place for an hour at a time.
Well, I've got a lot of duties, but I'm very fond of you, you know. And maybe one day...
I know, you silly sod. We can't get married yet, but we can still see each other and be fond of each other.
In the second option, Teresa gets angry and tells him to take a hike.
When you say the two of us, it gives me goosebumps. Sorry, but I don't want anything more. I'm not the right kind of fella for a millmaid.
What do you mean you don't want anything more? Am I only good for a roll in the hay? You behave as if I was asking you for a wedding. At least now I know what you're really like. Next time I'll take care of my own laundry, even if it's raining brimstone. Farewell.
Now, you could just call this bad writing, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree, but I also think this is an important look into Henry's perspective as our narrator, because according to his account, Teresa so far has been steady and consistent in her personality and affections, but as soon as he rejects her, she instantly becomes a caricature of the woman scorned. And this is despite the fact that when he overcommits and says they'll be married, she gives him a reality check and maintains her affections with low commitments. If a low commitment relationship is what she wants, neither answer should offend her, certainly not send her into a fit of indignant rage. It's a bit of a cliche, especially considering how strong Teresa's characterization has been up to this point, and I think it's valid to read that as Henry being an unreliable narrator. In his mind, he was being reasonable no matter what, and she was either not that interested or furious at his dismissiveness, and either way, he comes away from the questline not committed to an exclusive relationship with this character who may or may not ever enter the story again. This isn't to say that because their relationship is somewhat poorly written and ends on a relatively ambiguous note, that it proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that Henry is gay. What it does for me, especially in the context of the rest of the evidence, is cast doubt on Henry's motivations throughout the game when interacting with women, and in general when performing masculinity.
Performing medieval masculinity.
Throughout KCD, Henry is routinely interacting with the dominant ideologies of the time, which more often than not take the form of patriarchal and misogynistic systems of belief. Is that redundant? Is that redundant to say they're patriarchal and misogynistic? A little bit. I'm not gonna properly cite any sources here as much as I would like to, mostly because I work a full-time job and proper research and citation takes a lot of time and effort. So for the sake of actually finishing this script, I'm going to instead recommend you read historian Dr. Eleanor Yanega's book, The Once and Future Sex, which is a thoroughly researched book on women's roles in society throughout history. Her blog is also really informative and funny and focuses a lot on sex and gender in medieval Europe specifically, as that's her area of expertise. I'll link that in the description. You should check it out. So, to be somewhat reductive, gender expectations in medieval Europe were pretty rigid and hierarchical, with philosophers and religious figures combining the misogynistic views of Plato and Aristotle with the misogynistic rhetoric of biblical text and paratext to come to the conclusion that women were created specifically to be subservient to men, while also being horny temptresses who would sabotage men and ruin everything if they weren't in their proper place. And that's not hyperbole. They literally believed the essential nature of masculinity was hot and dry, logical and active, while the nature of femininity was cold, wet, emotional, and passive. Part of this belief was that the heat and logical vigor of a man was physically manifested in his sperm, and women were constantly craving the stuff because their own nature was so weak and moist and passive. So they were constantly trying to get it from men, which would of course make the men weaker and more passive and less manly and rational. Yes, really. Please read Dr. Yanega's work. Medieval sexism is wild and hilarious. Combined with the religious ideas that sex was for procreation only and that any sex act that couldn't lead to impregnation was a slight against God, and therefore sodomy, the general vibe was that women wanted to bang all the time, and that was very bad. So the rational, logical men should marry them and have sex with them, but only for procreation, and never so much that the men would risk losing all of their precious magical nut. It's also why raping a woman was considered a crime less serious than something like butt stuff with another man. The cleverest among you have probably already connected the dots, but these bioessentialist and sexist beliefs have held such sway over humanity for such a long time, they still manifest to this day in the rhetoric of manosphere and dating guru types. You know, guys that insist all women are sluts looking for the most alpha mating partners, so if you're not lucky enough to be an alpha, you should overpay for their dating advice course that will instruct you to emotionally abuse women into sleeping with you, because that's really what they want, as they're naturally subservient to strong men, which is factually wrong, morally wrong, and cringe AF, to be totally clear. So what does all this have to do with Henry being gay? Well, if we examine Henry's behavior through the understanding of societal gender expectations, we can glean a bit more meaning from the things presented in the game. Henry knows how he is expected to behave as a man, and he knows how he is expected to feel about women. Like all people, he has been socialized with certain beliefs about the people around him, who they are, and how they relate to each other in a society that maintains hierarchies. This is explored with a much more deft hand in the game's DLC, A Woman's Lot, which does a solid job of laying out how much it definitely sucked to be a woman in patriarchal Bohemia. The main game is certainly less considerate of these issues. There's a sex worker living in one of the game's taverns who is just called Old Whore. Like, she has a whole backstory and a series of quests, but because of her position in society, even a sympathetic Henry who helps her never bothers to learn her name. Old Whore is the label of her personhood in the game's eyes, and therefore we must assume that to be Henry's perspective as well. Now, this isn't to disparage Henry as an inherently bad guy or evil sexist. Again, he is, like all people, a product of the time and place he exists. Through understanding this, we can see many of Henry's actions relating to women for what they are, performance of masculinity as defined by his time. And not only in his time, but also the performance of masculinity that is expected of a modern man as well. The game takes place in 1403, but it was written by 21st century people, mostly men, who bring to the text their own biases and beliefs about sex and gender, which is why I can see a scene of Henry trying to be smooth and flirtatious with a woman and immediately clock it as an attempt to live up to the masculinity expected of him. It's why when he shares that he couldn't be intimate with Bianca without alcohol, we can read it not as some vapid joke about his manliness, but instead as Henry using intoxication as a means of aiding in his performance of the masculinity expected of him. It's like those capsules you see in gas stations that are, like, have like a rhinoceros on them, and they're all like, "Oh, manly sex energy." Like, that's why guys feel the need to buy that. Not because there's something wrong with the man, but because society has convinced him that he must perform masculinity in a certain way. Like, I mean, it's how all things are marketed to men. Like, you have to perform this stoic, tough guy. Like, that's what it means to be a man. Certainly not making YouTube videos about video games with flour in your hair. Or at least it wasn't. It is now. This is manly now. It's why, even though Teresa seems entirely comfortable with a less traditional and socially appropriate relationship, Henry initially believes they're either getting married or he needs to leave. It's also why I can see a loading screen that says there was no cross-dressing in medieval Bohemia and see it as ridiculous. I can't remember exactly what it says. It's on the screen. I mean, look at Henry in this sweet-ass dress I found. Boy is absolutely slaying, even if all the men in the game are incredibly confused by it.
Aren't you meant to be in the monastery, lad?
No. What are you doing here? You're playing truant from the monastery, aren't you? No way. You're wrong.
The loading screen message, to me, reveals a bit of the inherent patriarchal beliefs of whoever wrote it and implemented it. Not to accuse them of being bigots, simply to say that they bought into the modern narrative of the naturalization of strict gender roles. Patriarchal propaganda, if you will. The idea that no one wore gender non-conforming clothing in medieval Bohemia is on its face farcical.
It's fiction.
Even a theoretical absence of evidence pointing to gender nonconformity cannot be taken as evidence of its non-existence.
Simply because you don't have evidence that something does exist does not mean that you have evidence that something doesn't exist.
Were they oppressed, forced into hiding who they were, and possibly even removed from the historical record? Almost certainly, and the insistence that it did not happen is erasure of medieval gender nonconforming and trans folks who, even just statistically speaking, most certainly existed. And that's not even considering the fact that, historically speaking, conceptions of gendered clothing have been in a constant state of flux. High heels were invented for and worn first by men in the late 17th century. Wrong. I don't know how I got this so wrong or why I wrote and performed it with such confidence, but I must issue a correction. While heels were very popular with men in 17th century Europe, odds are good they originated in Persia like 700 years earlier, worn mostly for horse riding and combat, though still pretty man-centric. In the early 16th century, Henry VIII wore armor that looked like this. That is a metal dress. Not that I'm complaining, it looks as badass. It's a badass dress. Cool dress. Now, the obvious reason one cannot cross-dress in KCD is that it would be a huge amount of work to implement, given that the bodies of Henry and Teresa, our playable characters, are modeled so differently proportioned, and the number of ways equipped clothing would have to be modeled would nearly double if they could both wear any clothing. I mean, clothing is already a mess in the game as is. Cross-dressing would have broken this camel's back. But making the statement, fucking small-ass private airplanes that just fly in a circle, like literally around my apartment, like the airport and my apartment, and they just fly in a fucking circle. I hate rich people, man. Anyway, sorry. But making the statement in the loading screen that cross-dressing wasn't a thing is at best an awkward and inaccurate covering of one's own ass, and at worst, erasure of the existence of an entire group of marginalized people. Which is all to say, the interpretation of Henry's behavior in the game as heterosexual is understandable, especially when it's coming from someone who has a cisgendered and heterosexual perspective. But taking into account the society he lives in, the enormous pressure to maintain heteronormativity and strict gender roles, Henry's awkward behavior around women and sex can be seen in a new light, as the earnest attempts of a little guy trying to hide the fact that he isn't totally secure in his masculinity. He isn't totally secure in his sexuality, and that's because he's gay.
Henry and the Sodomites.
Before I get to the ultimate and strongest argument I have for Henry being a total boy lover, I want to make a quick pit stop to talk about what are the only explicit examples of homosexuality in the game. I think this is important because it shows the ways Henry perceives and can interact with homosexuality in different contexts. The first mention of any sort of gayness, at least in my recollection, is in the character of Lucas. Henry meets Lucas during a quest to infiltrate a monastery, and the novice monk refuses to reveal anything about himself or make friends with anyone.
I mean, where you're from, what sort of life you had before, that sort of thing.
I'm a novice, and my monastic name is Lucas. Nothing else matters.
Further investigation reveals that Lucas is a sodomite and is rumored to sleep with men.
Beware of Lucas. He might corrupt you.
What do you mean?
He's a sodomite, a sinner. He might try to get you into the habit, or out of it.
Sodomy, as I discussed earlier, was highly looked down on as sin, and Lucas has been convinced by the society he lives in that he should feel ashamed of his sexual desires, despite never having even acted on them.
Yes. You can call me a sodomite, a sinner, a monster, the spawn of Satan. But tell me this, Gregor. Can I help the way I am? I tell you, it's a test of my faith. A test so daunting you can't even imagine it. I swear to God, I've never lain with another man. I've never sinned. When my father wanted me to find a wife and start a family, I told him the truth, and he had me sent here. And in a way, I was glad. My guilt had been consuming me, and I knew in the monastery I'd find peace. The Lord sees my soul, and he knows it's pure.
Henry only finds this out when he learns the monks have been tormenting and bullying Lucas about his sexuality, using it as an excuse to torture him after he finds them drinking at night when they shouldn't be.
I warned them if they didn't stop, I'd go and tell the prior. But instead of mending their ways, they vented their anger on me.
The other novices have even been convinced by the treatment of Lucas that he's somehow suspicious or untrustworthy.
If you ask me, he's got something to hide. I'd keep well clear of him if I was you.
Do you have any grounds for suspecting him of something?
Quite a lot. And also none at all. The circuitous who make the rounds despise him, and they'd never punish anyone without cause.
What I'd like to most draw attention to here is the possible reactions that Henry can have to Lucas after he learns this information, and the possible motivation for those actions. The player can choose to have Henry react as a bigot, condemning Lucas, and the relationship between them goes no further. Lucas rightfully telling Henry he has no compassion.
That you'd understand, have compassion. But I was wrong.
If Henry is accepting and understanding of him, however, Lucas gives Henry invaluable information for the mission he's on.
You should be true to yourself.
I'm glad you aren't like the others. Thank you for not passing judgment. Because now I know I can trust you. There's something I want to tell you. Novice Antonius is lying to us.
The framing here is interesting to me because I think Henry's responses are equally valid when read as talking to himself. He recoils into himself, condemns his own urges the same way Lucas does, shutting them down completely, blaming them on the devil. Alternatively, he agrees with Lucas that he is who he is, and importantly, he should be true to himself. As someone who has in the past struggled with my own sexuality, and known others who have, I find both of these tellings of the story very familiar. A version of myself from long ago might have spoken with the same level of disdain and disapproval that Henry shows, distancing myself in panic from feelings I was scared to identify with. I mean, when I was growing up, "that's gay" was a pretty universal way to insult something or someone you didn't respect.
Ha! Gay! Yo, stop it, fam. That's really discrimination.
Said it a lot. Heard it said a lot. It was said to me a lot. Truthfully, I guess. They called it.
Gay!
You're right. It's fact.
After learning to see things more compassionately, including myself, I came to the same conclusion Henry does, of accepting Lucas. If the player helping to tell Henry's story in this moment experiences the revelation about Lucas and reacts with disgust or disdain, Henry will too, and the story reflects that in Henry being unable to connect with Lucas. A more open-minded player gets the story from a more mature Henry, who recognized these feelings present in his own heart and accepted himself and Lucas, and the game validates and rewards this open-mindedness. The second instance in the game of queer representation is far less nuanced, and I think it happens as it does for two reasons. The first is that it is much more front and center in the game's narrative, unavoidable if one completes the main quests. And the second is that it represents a very different context for the issue of queerness to be present within. After an important battle, Henry's allies have captured one of their enemy's allies, a man named Eric. It is revealed after an interrogation scene, though not as a result of any of the dialogue choices in that scene, that Eric and his boss are most likely lovers.
He'll sacrifice you, just like everyone in Vranyk and Pribyslavitz. You're nothing but a common bandit.
You don't know anything. He'll come for me, and anyone who lays a finger on me will pay dearly.
Now I'm curious. Why would he care that much about you? Could it be your lovers?
You'd never understand.
Which is good news for Henry's friends, because it makes him a valuable hostage to trade for hostages the big bad guy is holding in a castle. The way queerness is used here, it feels more utilitarian, like we need a really good reason for the bad guy to value this hostage, so let's make them gay. Maybe that's not fair to speculate on, maybe that's a part of the historical record, I don't know. And the reveal, it isn't framed as privileged information we had to pry out of him, it's framed as making him irrational, weak, something about him that can be exploited.
For a while there, I thought we'd get nothing out of him. But in the end, he spilled his guts.
And the reaction of his boss and alleged lover is framed the same way. He instantly loses his cool and threatens the hostages he has over Eric's safety.
It seems we are in similar situations. Perhaps it's time to send our respective guests home.
Not a chance. Do you take me for a fucking fool? Be warned. If anything happens to Eric, I'll let every manjack here have his way with this bitch, and I'll dice Kobila into goulash meat.
Henry's allies are calm, rational, doing this because they have to. They've been given no choice, while the bad guys are the ones getting upset, emotional, and weak.
Nobly spoken, Your Grace. But for all I know, you may have done that already.
Well, friends, what do you suggest?
I'd say we have no choice but to attack.
It's a great risk, Robard, with Stephanie and Radzig inside.
I know how you feel, sir, but Toth is no fool. They are his last safeguard. He will do nothing to harm them until he is sure of victory.
Doesn't that sound familiar? Isn't that exactly the dynamic we discussed earlier in how medieval gender roles were defined? The framing here is unfortunately a bit homophobic, and again, I'm not trying to imply the writers are bad people, but the narrative is explicitly framing the fact that these two are gay as a weakness, overly emotional, while the fact that Henry and his allies care about the hostages they're trying to rescue is framed as manly and logical.
Part of this is definitely the narrative's bias toward the nobility of Bohemia as opposed to this invading noble, despite the fact that they're all feudalists manipulating the masses through systemic violence. I think Henry, rightfully so for his character perhaps, inherits the Czech patriotism of creative director Daniel Vávra, and thus the story isn't interested in systemic examinations, but rather a simplified history of good guys, the Bohemians or Czechs, and bad guys, the invaders. But I digress.
Why do this after showing the capability for nuance and a more compassionate touch in Lucas's character? Well, the first reason is, again, this is a main quest narrative mission. The scene will likely be seen by a much larger number of players than the optional dialogue with one of many side characters in the monastery. The producers of this game are well aware that despite the progress society as a whole has made in accepting queer people, there is a large audience of homophobes who still see queerness in this way, as a moral failing or at least uncomfortable or inappropriate. It is safer, in a society that still maintains heteronormativity in the mainstream, to keep gay characters on the sidelines, or make them the bad guys. And that isn't even mentioning the now infamous participation of Daniel Vávra in the misogynistic Gamergate movement. That topic could take up an entire hour-long video of its own, well beyond the scope of this project, though for people unaware, I will put a link to Ian Danskin's excellent video on Gamergate in the description. What it was, why it happened, and how fucking stupid it was. You're also inevitably going to see those comments down below that are like, Gamergate wasn't misogynistic, Gamergate was about ethics in gaming journalism, and yes it was, no it wasn't, and shut the fuck up. I probably won't include that. I don't think I'm going to include that.
Suffice to say, any person cheering that particular crowd of capital G gamers is either avidly misogynistic and homophobic, or at least unbothered by that particular kind of rhetoric, demonstrating unconscious patriarchal bias.
The second reason this representation fares much worse is, I think, more tied to Henry's perspective in this story, and particularly his position in the conflict at hand. Eric, after being outed by Henry, yells,
"You never understand!"
And despite understanding very well, Henry says nothing in response. Those strawmen from earlier might point to this as evidence that Henry isn't gay, because if he was, wouldn't he have been compassionate and understanding as he was with Lucas? Well, no, and the reasons are pretty simple. Henry's father is one of the hostages the bad guy has, and Henry is surrounded by all of the male role models of his society. Henry's father, who is also his liege lord, is an incredibly valuable hostage. It's totally logical for Henry to be more callous and insensitive to Eric in this context. That's his guy in there, and they basically haven't spoken to each other since the lame twist revealed that they're related, so yeah, he wants his guy back, damn it. More importantly, Henry is currently in the siege camp of the noble lords gathered to do a battle on the bad guys. As we discussed earlier, there's a lot of pressure from society at large to perform the expectation of one's assigned gender role, and never more so than when one is being closely examined by the guys in charge, the guys who supposedly represent the manliest of the manly. I mean, if you really go to town on Eric, maybe I shouldn't say it. It sounds like innuendo now. I mean, if you really give Eric the business, that's not better. Fuck. If you go really hard on Eric, no. If you do all of the meanest dialogue choices while interrogating Eric, Hanush is still like, I think you went too easy on him, man.
I thought you were much too easy on him. But it seems your approach was the right one.
Henry probably believes here, and rightly so in my opinion, that if he was all kindness and understanding with an enemy they just captured, these guys would probably lose respect for him. Hey, maybe we shouldn't lean so heavily on the fact that they're lovers. That's a bit cruel, don't you think?
What are you talking about, boy? Are you some kind of a woman? Are you some kind of a sodomite?
Those are my best Henry and Hanush impressions. You're welcome. So yeah, I think these interactions with other queer characters also support the interpretation of Henry as gay, or at the very least they don't disprove it. That's the thesis of this video. Henry's gay, or at least you can't prove he's not gay. What a strong argument.
Henry's got a boyfriend.
The final piece of evidence I'd like to present here is, in my opinion, the strongest and most obvious one from the entire first game, and that is the relationship between Henry and the character Hans Capon. Hans is the young lord of the region the game takes place in, under the care of his uncle Sir Hanush. Hans has yet to inherit all of the power and responsibility of his station due to his age and the relatively recent passing of his father. He is arrogant, entitled, and just really fucking annoying. I think he's a great character, well written and well performed by Luke Dale, because if he wasn't, I don't think I would have such strong feelings about how much he sucks. That's a good dog. Anyway, he and Henry first meet when Henry arrives at Hans's castle to further the main plot of the game and join Sir Radzig's garrison. Henry has caused some trouble by disobeying his lord's orders, but instead of getting punished like Hans and the other people in the room think he deserves, Henry is rewarded with service and allowed to be Radzig's henchman.
Sir, yes.
What an honor to be a cop doing all the work for a lazy rich guy. This starts the two off as rivals, Hans trying to put Henry in his place as a peasant, and Henry attempting to prove that he deserves the privilege he's been given.
Boy, keep in mind who you're talking to.
A braggart who was born with a silver spoon in his mouth.
Now, you've really done it. You'll go to the stocks for that.
Calm yourself, Sir Bernard. If the blacksmith boy feels he can prove himself, then let him try. Do you think you can beat me? Well,
anytime.
It's a relationship dynamic pulled straight out of a YA romance novel or fanfiction. They have a few contests, archery, combat, each complete with a saucy bit of dialogue.
Well, I didn't expect that. Probably just wasn't your day, sir.
What are you grinning about, boy? I think you owe me a little payback. How about a sword fight at the arena?
If you like.
Jesus Christ!
Well, you got the better of me this time, blacksmith. I must be having an off day.
Are you alright, sir?
Don't worry your mangy head about me, peasant. We'll see each other again soon enough.
They even get into a fist fight when Hans refuses to leave a tavern after it's closed, and Henry can't stand to let him get his way despite his station.
Buyers around? I'm afraid we don't drink with peasants. You're not in your village now, boy.
No, sir. Curfew's been rung. The alehouse is closing.
Nothing closes while I'm sitting here. If that's all, you're dismissed.
The bailiff instructed me to close the tavern at the proper hour. He doesn't want anyone disturbing the peace after curfew.
The bailiff? The bailiff can kiss my arse. I trust you haven't forgotten who's the rightful lord of Rattay.
No, it's Sir Hanush.
Oh, is he here? What, is he hiding under the table, maybe? No! Then what he wants isn't worth a fart in a bathhouse. And besides, he's only in charge till I grow up.
Which clearly hasn't happened yet.
Enough! You can't talk to me like that. I'm a nobleman.
Come now, sirs. You're not going to fight here, are you?
We most definitely are. This yokel needs to be taught his place.
That'll show him.
They simply cannot resist going at each other every chance they get, which results in Henry getting stuck going on a hunting trip as Hans's babysitter.
Oh, naturally. Who am I to deprive the young Lord Capon of his sport? And you can take Henry here as your page.
Him? Absolutely not.
You'll do as I've commanded.
I expected the tension to get ratcheted up even more now that they're forced to spend all this time together, in a fashion similar to many other male rivalry stories, where the characters involved grow to respect each other through constant conflict that morphs into a friendly rivalry, something akin to Goku and Vegeta from Dragon Ball, or even true friendship like Aang and Zuko from Avatar. Surprisingly, both Henry and Hans show a great deal of maturity during the trip, apologizing and even sharing their frustrations with each other.
Hanush was right. I should have behaved differently. More, well, gentlemanly. But that doesn't mean you were in the right. You can't throw a lord out of the tavern in his own town. Understand?
It's just that when you said those things in the arena, sir, I was, a little upset.
Ah! I just like to tease greenhorns a little. And you vexed me too. You were insolent to Captain Bernard and they rewarded you with service. Whenever I do anything reckless, even if it's for my honor, Hanush is on my back about it and I get punished. Like now.
Despite their differences, they're drawn to each other for some reason. Attracted, one might say. There's some quite good dialogue between the two while hunting, playful banter that continues to develop their budding relationship. Hans even shows a bit of empathy for Henry's recent traumatic experiences, and when Henry beats him in their hunting contest, he admits defeat rather graciously.
The Cumans slaughtered my friends and neighbours, and it was a miracle I got away. I don't know what else I can add.
I'm sorry about that. But tell me, I heard in the tavern...
What, that Sigismund flew down on a dragon? That the Cumans have horns and hooves? I'm sorry, my lord, but for me, Skalitz isn't a tale of adventure to share over a tankard of ale.
All right. I understand.
Shouldn't there be some reward for the victor?
Jesus, the insolence. A serf asking his lord for coin. But never let it be said I'm a pinch purse. Very well then.
Your serf humbly thanks you, my lord.
Their arguments and insults soon turn into playful jabs and inside jokes, turning the power dynamics of their society into an ironic and mischievous bond. At the height of this hunting trip, Henry loses track of Hans, only to find him captured by Cumans, and must gallantly come to his companion's rescue.
I'll have a bronze bust made of you, my friend. But where have you been till now?
Oh, you know, I was picking berries, had a drink of wine, took a little nap.
You lunatic! They almost had me roasting on a spit.
I'd say it looked more like they were about to take your maidenhood.
Now look here, dung grubber. Is that any way to speak to a nobleman?
A nobleman with crushed balls, friend.
That wound doesn't look good, Sir Hans.
You're right. Those Cuman swine roughed me up a bit. And my damned horse is bolted. You'll have to get me home somehow.
It all reminds me of that trope from romance stories where, like, a character, usually a woman, holds a man in disdain, only to be subdued by the man's rugged ability, after which she starts to fall in love with him. Like, I don't know, Buttercup and Wesley from The Princess Bride. He's just a farm boy, she's the daughter of the farm's owner, but he charms her with his dedication and resilience. Or in Pirates of the Caribbean, Elizabeth Swann is the governor's daughter who falls for the poor blacksmith's apprentice Will Turner. There's Shrek. Princess Fiona is rescued by Shrek, and at first they're constantly butting heads, but through their journey together, they come to understand they're not so different and fall in love. Tale as old as time. Fucking Beauty and the Beast. There you go. So Henry saves Hans. There's 50 seconds of loading, about 12 seconds of a cutscene, another 50 seconds of loading before another cutscene that's about 9 seconds long, and then another minute and 9 seconds of loading before you get some plot and a slightly longer 3-minute cutscene, followed by only another 30 seconds of loading before you finally get to play again. God, this game is rough. But from then on, the player is free to avoid Hans and his side missions if, like me, you really don't like spending your time babysitting a useless twat instead of exploring an open world and having an adventure. Which would, of course, make the enemies to lovers thing fall flat if the two never really interacted again, even if that is by player choice. But fear not, possibly dozens of hours of gameplay later, while infiltrating the monastery I mentioned earlier, a character describes one of the novices and Henry immediately, unprompted, brings up Hans.
What can you tell me about
That there's no man alive less suitable for the monastic life than him.
You don't or Capon.
Can't stop thinking about your man, Henry. Capon does eventually rejoin the main story during a stealth mission, despite the fact that he's wildly unqualified to be
After all,
there.
it can't be much different from sneaking out of the upper castle in Rattay and back in every night. Besides, who else will keep this hothead from raising bloody mayhem?
Look at Henry's face when Hans calls him a hothead. Adorable. The mission itself kinda sucks. It's one of those mandatory stealth missions that some games insist on throwing at players. You know, where it doesn't really matter if you've raised your stealth levels or not, because the mission is linear and scripted, in this instance with the player just following Hans. Could have given the player some agency over how the story plays out, or rewarded them for mastering a playstyle, but whatever. The real important thing here is how the mission ends. As Hans and Henry are having another go at each other and bickering over the mission, Hans is seen by an archer and shot in the ass.
Come on then, let's get the fuck out of here before they catch us.
Gorva! Fuck my ass!
I can't imagine a more fitting metaphor. He takes it in the ass. So Henry is forced, once again, to rescue his boy toy by carrying him out of the castle like a sack of gay potatoes. At this point, Hans once again leaves the story, especially, again, if you're trying to avoid him, until a big battle later where he shows up to give Henry this look, and is then present for the rest of the epilogue. After that janky battle and a bit of intense, boring Bohemian political intrigue, it's decided that Hans and Henry will go on a journey together to hopefully gain the allegiance of a nearby lord. So our boys set off, shoot the shit about all that has transpired as of late, and then right off into the sunset. Wait a minute, what's this?
The Lord be praised. What brings you to me?
Oh my god, is that the Hans DLC side missions? That's right, after all that time avoiding him, the side missions involving Hans Capon are actually required to see the final cutscene of the game and move the story forward. Now, there's nothing particularly important in these side missions. They're not awful, and some bits are quite fun, especially the part where Henry helped Hans court a girl in town.
You will hide and prompt me from a book of poetry.
I'll do what?
I shall love you then, my dear, as long as you lie with me here. If you'll not give your all to me, no longer shall I bide with thee.
I shall let you drink my beer, as long as you, buy one for me. If you'll not give your ale to me, no longer shall I buy for thee.
Jesus, Henry! What kind of yokel nonsense are you babbling? Me? You're the one who's babbling.
Though whether he succeeds or not is irrelevant. But as far as plot goes, there's nothing in them that seems required for whatever story might come next. I mean, they're not even required to see the credits.
You telling me this necklace Hans lost in a bet is some kind of crucial MacGuffin for the sequel? You telling me Henry's tight five to distract guys while Hans fails to get laid is a pillar of the world building?
So why make the player complete them before Henry's story can move forward? Well, for a very obvious and simple reason. This is Henry's story. As we touched on earlier, the opening of the game sets Henry as our narrator, and thus Henry has decided that his telling of the story can absolutely go no further until he describes for the audience his various shenanigans with Sir Hans Capon, his motherfucking boyfriend. With this final detail, it all comes even more sharply into focus. There are many, many other stories and side quests in this game, and none of them, not the side quests where Henry courts Teresa, not even the other DLC, which are some of the best content in the game, are required for Henry's story to continue. Henry loves this man, and cannot imagine telling the story without including these adventures, which are otherwise completely irrelevant to the plot.
Are you wishing you'd stayed home at Rattay instead of joining in our nighttime venture?
You must be joking. I haven't had so much fun since... actually ever.
Really? Despite being wounded? Actually, you missed the best part. When I was hauling you like a sack of grain to the battlements dead to the world.
It can't have been that much fun if I fell asleep, but you might have handled me a bit more gently. I'm black and blue all over.
Oh, alright then. Next time I'll just leave you to Istvan's tender mercies.
Nonsense. What would you do without me? Still, thank you for hauling me out of there.
Anything for you, my lord.
That's awesome.
So it must be said again, Henry was gay the whole time, guys. Pretty solid work. Pretty solid work, John. We can relax now, Bean. Mwah. We did it. We did it. You have anything to say? Nothing? Nothing? Okay. I love you. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you didn't, you can keep that to yourself. I've been thinking way too much about this game for months now. I'd played it several times, and I thought I'd really liked it. It was one of those games where it was like, I've got problems with it, but it still keeps pulling me back, even though I never finished it. And so when they announced the sequel, I was like, I should finish that game. And then through playing it with like fresh eyes and like more adult sensibilities, I just realized how bad most of it is. Like, it's just like like, I can understand if you like it. I don't blame anyone for liking it. There are a lot of things I like about it, but it's just like most of it's so bad. And I spent hours writing a 30,000 word script about all the things I didn't like about it. And I just didn't have the time to get it done. So then I saw the controversy around the apparently there's a gay scene in the sequel. Hi, Bean. And I had to say something because I've spent so much of my life thinking about this game, and now I can let it go and never think about it again. I'm free.